Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Brown, the guide manager here at Alpine Ascents International. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. There are certain mountains that need no explanation as to why we climb them. Denali is one of those mountains. Towering over the Alaska Range, its sheer scale and beauty exert a magnetic pull that has drawn climbers from around the world for generations. Leading today's Denali webinar is Don Wargowsky, one of Alpine Ascents' most experienced and inspiring guides. Don began climbing on the East Coast more than 2 decades ago and has been guiding professionally for over 15 years. Since joining Alpine Ascents in 2017, he's led expeditions on Denali, Everest, Manaslu, Antarctica, bringing a deep well of experience on snow, rock, and ice to every climb. His career highlights include the rare feat of climbing a floating iceberg and a truly one-of-a-kind expedition, climbing Burunse alongside a canine companion, making the first recorded dog ascent of the 7,000-meter Himalayan peak. But that's a story for another webinar. With a master's degree in education, Don is equally passionate about instruction and mentorship. Whether it's teaching avalanche courses in Washington or leading climbers up Denali's West Buttress, he's known for his calm leadership, attention to detail, and commitment to helping climbers reach their potential. A couple housekeeping notes before we dive into it. We'll have a comprehensive Q&A at the end of the webinar, so please drop your burning questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. In the chat, I'll be dropping helpful links and tips, so do keep an eye out. Without further ado, I'll pass it over to Don, and they'll take us through the details, preparation, and the magic of climbing North America's highest peak.
Thanks, Mary, and hi, everybody. That was a great intro. Wow, thank you. So yeah, friends, my name is Don Wargowsky, and we'll jump into the slideshow here momentarily. As Mary said, if you do have any questions as I'm going through, please go ahead and drop those in a chat. I will do my best to keep an eye on those, and I'm sure Mary will pass them along to me as well. I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll jump in. Okay. Apologize. Get back to the beginning for you. All right, so for our Denali webinar today, goals and things that we want to chat about is we'll talk about the mountain itself, give you a little bit of detail and background on the mountain itself, chat some about who the climb is for and how to prepare for it. We'll talk about the itinerary of the climb, not go through necessarily in a day-by-day kind of detail, but break it off into some larger chunks that we can discuss here in the amount of time that we have. And then chat logistics of the climb, a little bit about gear and equipment getting up there. And then, as Mary said, we'll save plenty of time at the end to have some questions and answers. So Denali is, of course, located in Alaska in Denali National Park and Preserve. The summit is 20,310 feet above sea level, which makes it the highest point in North America, one of the 7 summits. And it's located in the Alaska mountain range. It is just 240 miles north of Anchorage, so not too far from the coast, but very close to the Arctic Circle, just 200 miles below the Arctic Circle, so it's at a pretty northern latitude. And Denali has the greatest relief of any mountain on the planet, meaning from its foothills up to the summit, there's over 17,000 feet of elevation. Thankfully, we're able to fly over a good part of that. On the approach, our climb starts at 7,200 feet, which cuts off that first 4,000 feet of gain, but still leaves us 13,000 feet of climbing to get to the top from where we fly into. In Alaska, and specifically on Denali, during our climbing season, there is 24 hours of daylight. And when we say that, it's actually like bright light daylight. Certainly mid-season, you can read a book in your tent at 3 o'clock in the morning without needing a headlamp. So it's very bright up there. And as a result, sometimes the first few days on our trips will actually switch over to a nocturnal schedule where we're climbing during the evening hours. And avoiding the hot part of the glacier during the day, which we can chat about a little later. And also, I think that most people would consider Denali to be the hardest of the seven summits. You could arguably say that potentially Everest is more challenging, and it's a bit of an apples and oranges comparison. But I will say, been on Everest a couple times and Denali 8 times now, and every single Denali trip that I've done has been more challenging than any time that I've had on Everest. A big part of that is just due in fact that it's a very blue collar mountain. It is definitely hard work to get to the summit of Denali. We'll talk about why here in just a little bit, but physically, I do think that Denali is the most challenging of the seven summits and one of the more challenging mountains that we have in our catalog at Alpine Ascents. In terms of the climbing route, the route that we guide here is the West Buttress route. And on paper, it is an easy technical route. And that's not to say it's an easy route, as I just mentioned. It's not. It's very physically challenging. However, the slope angles that we are dealing with on the mountain are not horribly steep. It's not vertical climbing. There are a couple places where we have fixed lines where slope angles can go up to 45 or 50 degrees for short sections, but it's not a terribly steep climb overall. What makes it challenging is not the technical difficulty, but the fact that we don't have porters or yaks, mules. We don't have pre-established camps on Denali. Denali is climbed in a very classic American style of guiding in which we are totally self-contained. We carry all of our own stuff, we build our own camps, and move everything up the mountain working together as a team, as opposed to, say, Himalayan climbing, for example, where we rely very heavily on local support and use, say, like helicopters, yaks, mules much more extensively. On Denali, we fly in, we step onto the glacier with all of our equipment that we need for the next 3 weeks, and we take everything up and down the mountain as a team. We do it completely ourselves. Um, what that means is we do start off with a lot of gear. When climbers get off that airplane on the glacier at 7,200 feet, they have all their personal gear, clothing, group food, and fuel for the entirety of the trip. And the total weight of that will vary somewhat just based on the person, their size of clothes, and what they bring exactly. But we find that typically as we start the trip, clients are beginning with somewhere between 130 and 140 pounds of equipment, which sounds like a lot. It sounds really overwhelming. And if we had to carry it all on our backs, it would be awful. But on Denali, we use sleds on the lower part of the mountain where we're covering the most mileage. And so typically on Denali, what we'll do is we'll leave the airstrip and start off on snowshoes, and we'll be on snowshoes all the way up to 11,200 camp. And for the duration of that, we're pulling sleds the entire time. And then we'll switch over to crampons typically at that camp and then continue to pull sleds up to 14,200. And there's some variation in technique and style and how this is done. But often, what we're doing lower on the mountain is we'll do what we call a cache and move system. So what that means would be, for example, if we're camping at Camp 1, instead of moving all of that equipment all in one big push up to Camp 2, we would take about half of our equipment, the things that we don't need for the next few days, for example, food and fuel that we need for later in the trip, and we'll carry that up the mountain, dig a hole into the snow, bury all of that stuff. That's called caching, and then move back down to that lower camp and spend the night. And then the following day, move up to where our cache was, or potentially even just above it. And there's several advantages of doing this cache and move system. One being primarily that you don't have to carry 100% of that weight all the time. Obviously, it's a lot easier to move 60 pounds of stuff than it is to move 120 pounds. And also, it really helps with acclimatization. It's a technique that we call climb high, sleep low. What we do is we get a couple thousand feet up higher onto the glacier, and that starts to basically tell our bodies that we're moving to higher elevations. So the body kind of kicks into overdrive, starting the acclimatization process. We start to create more red blood cells and thicken cell walls and all the things that happen with acclimatization. But caching, taking that stuff up higher and then moving back down, starts that process but then allows us to sleep at an elevation that has more oxygen. And it just allows for a speedier acclimatization process. So the combination of those two things making it easier to move the gear as well as the climb high, sleep low philosophy that we have here tends to work very well on Denali. We have a very conservative acclimatization schedule. If you look online at like private trips, for example, you'll see that a lot of people try to go up and climb Denali in 14 to 16 or 18 days. And as a result, the success on those trips is typically significantly less than what we see at Alpine Ascents. And the reason being is we just build a lot of time into the schedule to allow for proper acclimatization as well as inclement weather. If you moved every single day of the trip, Denali can be climbed pretty effectively in 13 to 14 days. And then we just have those extra days to account for, again, weather and proper acclimatization. That said, it's very common that we end up using all those days. The weather on Denali is not the weather that you see in most of the pictures that we have here, which are beautiful and clear because we want you to be able to see the mountain. We often have weather that's rolling through that can shut us down for a few days at a time. So having that extra time built into the schedule can often be the difference between doing a slightly longer trip and being successful, and the difference between that and then having to, say, alternatively, not be able to summit because you have flights back and then having to reschedule and go up for a second trip. So before the climb, who is this for? Denali again is, a pretty challenging peak. So who'd want to go there? People are looking for a good challenge for sure. Definitely anyone that's preparing for an 8,000 meter peak. So if we're looking at something bigger like Everest, Montesalud, Choy Oyo, Denali is the absolute best training ground in the United States, in North America, really, to train for those places. While we don't have the extreme elevation that we do at many places in the Himalayas, the conditions on Denali are very similar because it is at such a high latitude. It gives people the opportunity to live in a glaciated mountain environment and experience the very cold temperatures that we often experience on 8,000 meter trips. Also, of course, there's people who are interested in doing the seven summits, Denali being one of those. So before Denali, skills that we would want to have before we embark on the trip would be excellent self-care and campcraft, meaning that people are just experienced traveling and living on the snow and on glaciers. Cramponing on firm ice and snow is critical. The conditions on Denali can vary greatly, and we've been there when we're breaking trail through thigh-deep snow, and also been there when the snow is scoured down to blue ice and we're cramponing up very blue hard ice, and of course everything in between. And then technical skills are required. We want everybody to know how to travel on a rope team. We need everybody up there to have a basic understanding of crevasse rescue. That's a requirement from the national park. A big thing on any expedition, and certainly on Denali, is we need everybody to be a team player. These are group trips. They're guided typically in a 3-to-1 ratio, meaning either 6 clients and 2 guides or 9 clients and 3 guides. Either way, we're on a relatively large team. It's not a private trip. And so people that do well in a group and can be flexible, which is the next point, are really an asset to the team. Denali, like any expedition, the ability to kind of go with the flow and be flexible is absolutely essential. I would say, especially on Denali with the weather that we can have there, it's really important to be flexible. If we have perfect weather, we might move at a pace that is a little bit ahead of the itinerary that one might see on the website, where we can get in and get out and take advantage of the great weather. There's no need to sit there through good weather in many of the camps. However, it's also possible to move into a camp, have a weather front come in, and get stuck for 3 to 5 or 7 or more days. And so I think that when people have the ability to kind of roll with that and not feel confined by a rigid schedule, if they can kind of adapt to what the mountain gives us, we find that they tend to have a much more enjoyable trip. And then in terms of like specific prerequisites for a Denali trip, We have 6, 8, 9, and 10-day courses that we do here in Alaska that all work as a prerequisite for the course. If we're looking for some apologize, everybody. It looks like I got muted somehow. Um, let's see. Let Mary pop on here and see where we left off.
You were only, oops, sorry. Oops. You were only muted for like 15 seconds.
Oh,
So
great.
maybe
Perfect.
just like, yeah, go back just a tiny bit.
Apologize for that, everybody. I have no idea how that happened. Anyway, yeah, just bump back to prerequisites. Here in Washington, we have 6, 8, 9, and 10-day courses in Washington that cover all the skills that are required for Denali. Our Denali prep course here in Washington takes place on Mount Rainier in the winter. That's in the months of typically December through April, and that's the closest conditions that we have here in the lower 48 to simulate what it's like to be climbing in Alaska. And then if people have the opportunity to do it, we also have an 8-day course in Alaska in the range, which would be the absolute best way to train for that. For a lot of people to travel to Alaska is an amazing experience and a great way to train for the mountain itself. However, with it being a little farther away, most of our clientele prefers to train here in Washington. We also need folks to have experience climbing at least 2 high altitude glaciated peaks. Denali is absolutely not, a stepping stone to big peaks. I view it much more as a graduation climb. So a couple glaciated peaks as a minimum is a great idea, and more is better. We find that the more experience people have going into expeditions like Denali, generally the more comfortable they are and the more they enjoy the trip, and often the more successful they are. And then finally, people that do really well on Denali typically also have experience with very high elevation, like climbs in Mexico, Aconcagua, South America are all great options to prepare for Denali. And this is a video that kind of shows the route from base camp up to the summit. It's about a minute or so long. I'm going to let this play and give everybody an idea of kind of what the route looks like. All right. So as you can see from looking at the map, we start off with some pretty long mileage in the beginning days. And as you continue up the mountain, that mileage each day tends to decrease a little bit, but the slope angle also increases a little. Denali is one of those mountains that kind of gets progressively harder each day of the trip, which is kind of a great way to break into the trip. The first couple days aren't terribly challenging, and we can kind of ease into the Alaska experience. To get up there, people need to travel to Anchorage, Alaska. So you can fly into Anchorage from wherever in the world it might be coming from. Uh, Pro tip on that, if you're coming in from a time zone that's drastically different than Alaska, then might want to consider if you have the time coming in a day early and kind of adapting to that can be beneficial, especially the folks that we have that are coming from Europe and Asia. And then from Anchorage, we can take either a shuttle van or there's a very beautiful train ride that goes from Anchorage up to Talkeetna. And that's a pretty short drive. It's usually about 3 to 5 hours, depending on conditions of the road and traffic up there. So flight in and then a little overland travel to get to Talkeetna, where we'll be based out of for the next couple of days. Um, the first day of the trip, when we all meet, we do a very extensive gear check. It's actually a bit of drying tents that you can see in the picture on the left here, but we have an airplane hangar up there that we do our gear checks in, where everybody can spread out the massive volume of food and gear, equipment and clothing that they brought up for the trip. And we just go through item by item and make sure that everybody has all the things that they need for the trip to go up and have fun and be safe, and not too much extra stuff that's going to add to unnecessary pack and sled weights. And then once we've accomplished that, we will take one of the company vans. We go into town, into Talkeetna, and grab some lunch. And then we have an MPS, National Park Service briefing with one of the climbing rangers there, where they essentially go through a short version of a more detailed explanation of how to do things on the mountain and how to keep the mountain clean, how to dispose of human waste and things like that, that the guides will cover very extensively. But the Park Service has to talk to everybody as well. And then we spend the night in Talkeetna. And the next morning, we get up all ready to go and fly onto the glacier. The flight onto the Kalhentna Glacier is absolutely stunning. I've been pretty privileged to have been able to do quite a few fixed wing flights and helicopter flights on many different continents and some of the biggest, most beautiful mountain ranges in the world. And still, I will say, hands down, the most beautiful flight that I've ever taken anywhere on the planet is flying into Denali. It's absolutely gorgeous up there. Um, I can't say enough about it. Even if you don't do the trip, the flight in would be worth it. Um, but yeah, so we leave Talkeetna, and it's about a 30 to 40-minute flight in, depending on the exact route that we take. And then we land on a glacier in the snow with the planes that have a combination of skis and wheels on them. And we pull all of our equipment off of the plane, and then we'll typically set up camp and spend at least one night in base camp to kind of let everybody acclimate to the area that they're in and cover any last minute training that we need to do before we start up the glacier. The flight in, again, absolutely gorgeous. You kind of leave the green of Talkeetna and you see all these rivers snaking through the lower plains, and we get to watch the transition from this kind of lush green area and get into, the mountain desert up here. And I mentioned earlier that a lot of the pictures are very beautiful and things are clear, especially on the lower glacier. This is maybe a little more representative of what we might see. It's often quite foggy and snowy there. Whiteout conditions are very, very common. Um, However, lower on the glacier, we tend to move through just about any conditions like this. The guide staff up there is all very experienced and can move through whiteout conditions pretty effectively. So once we leave that lower camp, at the airstrip, we move up to Camp 1. That is often done in what we call a single carry, meaning we're not doing the cache and move system. And we're able to do that because it's relatively flat and it's quite easy to drag heavy sleds on flat terrain. It's not that much physical exertion. From that first camp at the airstrip to the actual official Camp 1, it's about 600 feet of elevation gain that happens over 5.5 miles. That's a net gain. Unfortunately, when you leave the airstrip, the first thing you do is walk down a 600 vertical foot hill. So it actually ends up being about 1,200 feet of elevation gain total that happens over 5 miles. So it's a relatively low angle, and it's a great way to kind of get everyone broke into pulling the sleds in Alaska and knock the rust off from previous trainings that they may have done with us. And not the most challenging day, but very beautiful travel on the glacier. From Camp 1, We'll typically post up there for a couple of nights. We will often carry loads from 7,800 feet up a feature called Ski Hill, which is kind of the first significant hill of the trip. And we'll put a cache in somewhere around 10,000 feet and then move back down and spend the night at Camp 1 again at 7,800 feet. And then weather allowing, the following day, we'd move up to Camp 2, actually going up and past the cache and camping at 11,200 feet. And then the following day, we do a very easy day we call back carry. We just drop down 1,200 feet from Camp 2, pick up the cache that we put in a couple days prior, and then bring that back into camp. That process usually only takes a couple of hours, so that back carry day is often more of a kind of a rest day for the climbers. And depending on how much rest we need and what the weather is giving us, that process of moving from Camp 1 to Camp 2 typically will take about 3 or 4 days to do the carries and back carry. That's kind of our first big jump in elevation. That leg is 3,400 feet. And in this photo, the camp we see below here, that's the camp at 11,200. This is the top of the hill above camp. We're finishing up a carry from higher up. We come in down low here on the Kalahitna Glacier and camp in this basin. Once we've established that camp at Camp 2 and gotten all of our equipment up to camp, then we'll start to move things further up the mountain. We do a very similar process moving to Camp 3. We carry loads up to 13,500 feet and cache there. That's a pretty big day. We're getting up to some higher elevation there. And while it's only 700 feet more to get to Camp 3, that 700 feet is gained over a pretty long distance. And so it's just not efficient to go all the way to camp to put that cache in. So we go up Motorcycle Hill, around Squirrel Hill, and through the polo fields, and we cache all of our equipment up at 13,500 feet and then move back down to Camp 2 for the night. And then we're just waiting on a good weather window to move up to 14,000 feet. A big advantage of having the number of teams that we do on the mountain is we can get some very specific weather information from teams ahead of us and behind us. And so we'll often radio up to teams that we have in the 14 area and make sure that the weather is looking good around Windy Corner because the conditions there can get pretty rough when it's windy. When we do move up, we'll go up to 14.2, spend the night, and then the same thing that we did at Camp 2, we also do at Camp 3, which is get up the following morning, go downhill for about an hour, pick up our cache, and come back. Again, that process to move from Camp 2 to Camp 3 takes somewhere between 3 and 4 days. Elevation gain there is pretty significant. It's about 3,000 feet. And because we're doing these bigger jumps in elevation, that's a big part of why, again, we need to do that cache system to where we're climbing high and sleeping low. If you just spent one night at 11,200 and then bumped up to 14.2, the vast majority of people would not feel very well. They'd probably get sick. So spreading that out over a couple days is essential. And this is what our caches look like. We have to bury everything down in the snow. The reason for that is ravens are actually a very significant problem on the mountain, and the ravens have figured out that where we put our marking wands are is where we put food, and the ravens will dig down into the snow by as much as 2 feet. So everything that we bury in our caches has to be at least 3 feet below the surface, and to fit in 12 people's stuff, we often have to dig 6 to 8 feet down so that the top of our cache is still buried with at least 3 feet of snow. And then once we're settled into camp at 14,200, that's kind of our advanced base camp. We set up there for a few days. We rest. We've been working pretty hard, to get there. We've been typically working for somewhere between 7 and 10 days to get to that camp. So we'll often take a full rest day or so. We'll work on additional training. We practice fixed line ascension in camp. And then we also carry loads up to the top of the fixed lines and put a cache in at 16,500 feet. That day we find to be really useful to go up with lighter loads and we just do a small cache with a couple days worth of food and then come back down and prepare to move camp the following day. So when we go up the fixed lines with our full packs for the first time, we've already done the fixed lines and have the advantage of having experience on those lines already. This move is typically where we leave the sleds behind. When we start climbing above 14,200 feet, at that point, everything needs to be on our backs. And because we've already used a lot of our food and fuel at this point, our pack weights have diminished quite a bit, and we will also cache food at 14,000 for the descent. So typically moving up to 17,000, clients might expect packs to be somewhere in the like 45 to 55 pound range. We're not moving that 100 plus pounds any longer. Also at 14, it's a place where we're kind of waiting on a good weather window. We needed several days to be able to get to 17,000 feet, summit the mountain successfully, and then get back down to 14. So we'll often post up there and wait for that weather window, and that can be a matter of a couple days. It can certainly turn into a week or so, depending on the weather. So that's a great place to read a book, play cards, and kind of dig in and enjoy the, relatively speaking, easier conditions at 14 than what we have at 17. 17 is kind of a hostile place. The move up to 17,000 camp is about 6 to 9 hours, depending on the weather and the group. You can see in the picture here the giant snow walls that we build there. 17,000 camp is a pretty wind-scoured camp, so we have to build snow walls to help protect the tents from the wind that can come in there. Because it's kind of a less hospitable environment to stay in. Again, we try not to spend too much time up there, try to limit it to just a few nights if we can. But when we go up, we always treat it like we would any other camp where we dig in, make it home, and are always prepared for the worst and hoping for the best in terms of weather. That's another really big jump. Some people would argue that the move to high camp with full packs is the most physically challenging day of the trip. And I would agree with that. I would also say that that move to high camp, in my opinion, is the most beautiful day of the trip. The ridge line that connects the fixed lines to high camp is one of the most beautiful, picturesque ridge lines that I've seen anywhere in the world. It drops off several thousand feet onto the Peters Glacier on the left, and to the right, the Calhitna, and the views from walking along that ridge are just unbelievable. And then from there, may take a rest day, or if weather allows, might go ahead and jump right up to our summit day. Again, summit is at 20,310 feet, so it's just a little over 3,000 feet up and then back down. So a relatively big summit day that can often be between 10 and 14 hours. Can go longer than that, but a very, very big summit day, and a very beautiful summit day. This photo is the lower part of a feature on the mountain called the Audubon, where we traverse across a slope that's approximately 45 degrees and get up to a place called Denali Pass. This is the most technically challenging part of the day, which is kind of nice. You get it out of the way right away. And then from Denali Pass, head up towards Zebra Rocks and work our way up around these black and white striped rocks. Take a break at about 18,500 feet, and then move up a little farther. We'll cross the football field, take a break there at the top of a hill called Pig Hill. Take another break at 19.5. And then this very iconic ridge line is the highest ridge line in North America. We follow the left-hand side of this very steep cornice ridge line that takes us the rest of the way to the summit. This is the last few steps right before we get to the summit ridge. It's a very long ridge. You can see a climber here in the background taking a little break. But absolutely beautiful views from there. And then we spend a few minutes on the summit there, take our photos, and then descend back down as efficiently as we can. And from 17,000 camp, then we need to get our way off the mountain. You know, we've done about half of the work to that point. And as crazy as it sounds that it can take, 16 to 18 or 19 days to get to the top of the mountain, we often descend the mountain in 1 to 4 days. Typically, we try and keep that on the shorter side, and then we allow for a couple days of time at the airstrip itself. It's kind of the hard fact of you can climb the mountain and get back down to the airstrip, but we need good weather at the airstrip, we need good weather in Talkeetna, and we need good weather to be happening in between those two places. So while not super common, it's not unheard of to get stuck at the airstrip for a period of time on the way out. So we want to allow for that as well. But all said and done, from the summit back down to the airstrip where we fly out, we drop down over 13,000 feet and cover about 16 and a half miles to descend, which sounds pretty brutal at the end of the trip. But as we're descending, the air is getting thicker, we're getting more oxygen, and we find that people are actually feeling typically pretty good and pretty strong by the time we get back down to the airstrip. And in terms of logistics for the mountain, people often ask about choosing dates. What's the best time of the mountain to go? When's the best weather going to be? And that is impossible to predict. When people sign up for these courses, of course, we have no, or excuse me, for this climb, we have no idea what the weather is going to be several months out. Often the climbs book up, so people have to, sign up and put down deposits earlier to reserve their place on a trip, and there's no way to kind of wait for perfect weather and book. Um, Historically, if you looked at the average weather over the last 30 years, you'd find that typically the best 2 weeks of, or excuse me, the best month of weather is going to be the last 2 weeks of May and the first 2 weeks of June. However, there's no guarantees from year to year. If you went on June 30th for 10 years in a row, you would very likely experience 10 different weather systems that are coming through. So I would encourage you when choosing dates to climb the mountain, look at your schedule first. Give yourself plenty of room to prepare for the trip, give yourself time for that, and give yourself a nice buffer before anything important that you have at home. If you're moving, having a child, getting married, some big life event, you probably don't want to schedule that, a day or two after this trip. So do what works best with your schedule. And a lot of our clients have done several other trips with us before going to Denali. Again, it's kind of a graduation climb. And if along the way they've met a guide that they like and want to work with, they can request that guide and climb with that guide on the dates that he or she is working on the mountain. We can't really predict weather, but if you've had a good time with a guide in the past, odds are you're going to have a good time with that guide on Denali as well. So I think that's kind of a good thing to look at also. Generally speaking, early season on the mountain is going to be a little colder and windier. Later season on the mountain tends to be a little bit warmer, but with more precipitation. And there's a million exceptions to what I just said. But again, historical data, that's kind of what we're looking at. But any day, any week on any given year, it's going to vary greatly. The food that we have on the mountain is outstanding. The guides do all the cooking for breakfasts and dinners. They melt snow to provide all the water for the clients each day, so clients don't have to work with stoves or cook any of their own food. The lunches that we have on the mountain are typically like on the move snacks, the way that we would have on like a typical climbing day on any guided climb. However, when we do have days where we are in camp, if we're taking a rest day or doing a back carry, we'll often do hot lunches in camp as well. And this is my opinion, but I think without question, we have the best food of any guide service that I have seen on the mountain. There are some folks up there that are going on dehydrated and freeze-dried meals for most of a 3-week trip, and we tend to eat very, very well. We'll do pizzas, burritos, we do bagels and salmon lox and things for breakfast. I think that especially in longer trips, having good food is essential. Sometimes on a shorter trip, 2 or 3 days, eating some like kind of more like simple, lightweight REI style foods works. But when you start getting into a period of weeks on a mountain, I think that most people are a lot happier and most people's guts are a lot happier if they have food that they're used to eating at home. So we bring a lot of real food, a lot of very good food on the mountain. Uh, and in terms of just environmental responsibility and human waste on the mountain, Denali is one of the cleanest mountains that you'll find anywhere in the world. The NPS does a really good job of helping to educate people and regulate waste on the mountain. And they use the system that is specifically designed for Denali, which is what you see in the picture there. That is called the Clean Mountain Can. People always ask about human waste and what we do with that on the mountain. All of our solid waste goes into these cans, and we start the trip with those cans, and take them up the mountain with us. And then we bring all the solid waste off of the mountain with us. So absolutely nothing gets left on the mountain. It's something that Alpine Ascents has been doing there for a very long time. I want to say close to 10 years now, and really has the system dialed. And as a result, the mountain is a lot cleaner because we're able to do that. Other things to consider are gear. On the website, Alpine Ascents has a very extensive, very detailed gear list. And when you first look at that, it's a lot and it kind of looks overwhelming. You just break it down into little chunks. You'll acquire things along the way from doing various other trips with us. But when people go up to Alaska, they need to already have everything that's on the list. If they don't own those things, rentals are available for many of the items. But very important to know that in Talkeetna, there is not a gear store. There is no place to buy anything. So if we go up there without something, then that means that you're going onto the mountain without that thing. You literally cannot buy any of this stuff in Talkeetna in any way whatsoever. I say this a lot, and sometimes it still kind of surprises people. A few years ago, I had strangely two clients that flew up to Alaska that didn't have bowls. And you would think that just finding a plastic bowl in Talkeetna wouldn't be a big deal. I had to go to like 8 different restaurants with a $50 bill in my hand and go back into the kitchens and ask if they would sell me a bowl before I could get a bowl so we could fly in. So, having things like the proper gloves obviously aren't going to be something we can pick up there. When looking at gear and what to purchase, get the best stuff that's out there. The really good, high quality, well-tested equipment. That stuff exists for mountains like this. Denali is a pretty harsh environment, and it's not a place to skimp on gear quality. And then training could be 3 webinars in and of itself. There's some really great advice on the website. I'd encourage you to look at that. Some folks will seek the advice of like a personal trainer to get ready. I will say the sooner that people start, typically the more fit they become, and then the happier they are on the mountain. I've never seen anybody ever get off Denali and say, I wish that I would have trained just a little bit less. Being in peak shape before going to a mountain like this is absolutely essential. And the more fit we are, the more we can enjoy it. And we find that folks that have put in the time and the effort ahead of time to do that training, they often are really, soaking in the mountain and really enjoying the experience there as opposed to just kind of surviving it. It should be fun up there. And that's all I've got for our slideshow here. I think we'll pop into some Q&A.
Don, that was awesome.
Thanks.
Great presentation. I am even more psyched about Denali than I was when we started this. Please let the office know I'll be taking 3 weeks off in June.
Love to have you up there.
Okay. I have a question right off the top about boots.
Always boots.
Always boots. For Denali, what's the calculus between double boots and triple boots? Let's get into it.
So this is a super popular question. I think at some point we're going to have a like blog post up with some more detailed info on this. But there are options on Denali. And for those of you that may be unfamiliar, there's 2 systems that we can go with. We can go with what's called a triple boot or an 8,000 meter boot. And those are what they sound like. They're boots that are designed for 8,000 meter peaks. They're extremely warm and they're extremely expensive. The other option is to wear double boots, which are also very expensive, but then to bring what's called an overboot to add on top of a double boot to give it just a little extra insulation. Those over boots are basically, it's essentially a neoprene sock that gets pulled over the boot with a zipper that goes up the front, and they're designed to interface very well with crampons. The advantage of doing the double boot system with an overboot is that because the boots aren't quite as warm as triple boots, one could argue that your feet aren't going to overheat as much on the lower glacier. I would say that on most days, your feet are going to overheat in anything, but that's a consideration. Also, the double boots tend to be slightly lighter. And then you kind of have the option of switching into an overboot on colder days. That's typically just going to be the last couple days of the trip. The advantage of the triple boot system is the overall weight of the combined double boot with an overboot is going to be more than a triple boot. And if you're using boots that you plan to use on something like a Mount Vinson or Everest, Montesalou, you're going to need triple boots anyway. And so having that, if it's already, part of your quiver of boots, is pretty beneficial. It's a nice thing to have. And it's a great way to use that system and kind of get it figured out before you use it on like bigger peaks, say in the Himalayas. Both work equally well. And in my experience, the last few trips I've done, I see kind of a 50-50 split on what systems people are using. Um, if you have feet that tend to run exceptionally cold, like me, like I run really, really cold, I think having the triple boots are going to be just a little bit warmer and therefore a little bit nicer, a little more comfortable on a summit day. But for a lot of people, the triple boots wouldn't be necessary. They'd probably be overkill. So good option either way. And in either system, if people want, you can add like a heated insole to kind of add some additional heat, or a heated sock to have some additional heat on a summit day if you want. Not a requirement, but again, for folks like me that run really cold, that is the system that I use.
Excellent answer. So enlightened. We have a question from an anonymous attendee. How many 65-year-old climbers have we guided? Before you dive into this question, it'll be, I mean, we don't have a number, but age is just a state of mind. One of our guides, Vern Tejas, is now, how old is Vern now? Like 72?
I think so, yeah.
And he guided Denali, I think when he was like 70, and it was his 60th.
Yeah, 60 something, 62, 63, something like that.
Yeah. So, okay, can you give any more enlightenment on like age and Denali?
Yeah, and I think, Mary said it well, it's a lot of, I think, kind of more the individual than it is the age. I've certainly seen, 28-year-old people that don't have any business being there and 70-year-old people that do. Um, that said, for anybody going, I think being in peak physical condition before they go is absolutely essential. Just being in the best shape of someone's life isn't necessarily good enough. We have to be, all at a very high level. It's very doable. And I can't say a number off the top of my head. Statistically, I would say that people 65 years and older are definitely going to be in the minority there, but you definitely see folks in that age range that are there every year and climbing successfully. What I would say is that if someone is interested in doing a peak like Denali, that's in that age range, probably the sooner the better would be a great idea. If someone's just starting now, if somebody wanted like personal advice or something, we can make a plan to help get somebody there in a shorter period of time versus like doing what I did, which was, I think I climbed for like 10 years before I felt like I was good enough to go do Denali on my own. So like having a little bit more expedited schedule might be beneficial.
Very nice. Okay, next question is in the risk management realm. On Denali, how serious is the risk of frostbite, and what have you noticed in your years of experience on Denali about the best ways to prevent it?
Oh, great question. The risk of frostbite there is very real. People get very significant frostbite on Denali, like life-changing frostbite on Denali every single year. With that said, at Alpine Ascents and most guide services, it's extremely rare. The 8 trips that I've done up there, I've never had anybody on any of my teams, either clients or guide staff, that got any level of frostbite whatsoever. In my personal opinion, I think that frostbite on a mountain like Denali is an absolute failure. It's a failure of the guide staff to help make good choices on the mountain, and help clients do what they need, or failure on a client's part to say have the right gear or experience and know when to use it, which is kind of a long answer to say it's very preventable. We don't go out and climb on days when it's -45 and blowing 50 miles an hour. All the lead guide staff kind of have a little matrix in their head of what is an appropriate temperature, wind speed, and conditions to climb on a summit day. And if it means taking an extra day or taking a rest day to wait for better weather where we're not going to have frostbite, then that's what we'll do. And that's why we have that longer schedule. It's like why we have that 21 days up there, is to allow that to happen. Again, I don't want to diminish the risks. It's an extremely cold, hard mountain, but we have the best equipment that's ever been known to humans in the history of Earth right now, and it's very easy, in my opinion, to avoid frostbite.
Very good. Next question. Ooh, okay, this one's a little bit more complicated. If someone plans to climb Denali in 2027, not this summer, but next summer, is it better to do a training climb in the spring of 27, like Baker or Rainier, that leads into a Denali departure, or the summer before in 26?
Oh, very good question. And like the answer to most questions, I mean, it's going to start off with it depends. I think it depends on where someone's at in their climbing career. If they're just getting started, I think the more the better as soon as possible. Um, and the reason that I say that is everybody kind of comes into this with different levels of skill and fitness. And the more we learn about someone's skill and fitness earlier, the better we can help design a system that gets them to Denali and has them set up for success there. It would be unfortunate if, say, like somebody had a trip in May and they were doing their final training trip in April. If there's something that needs to be worked on or adjusted there, that doesn't give us a whole lot of time to work with that. So I think kind of, as soon as possible is always the best idea on that. And climbs can absolutely be done, like if there's, like, oh, I want to get one more glaciated peak in the winter or late fall the year before, no problem. But I think like getting that 6-day course in or a Denali prep, I think is really beneficial to do at least 6 months ahead of time, if possible. It's not to say it's a bad idea to do it closer to, but if your schedule allows, I think doing it sooner than later is great. There's no consequence to being over prepared early.
Very good. We have a question in the chat from Chris. This is a hard one, but I think I have the answer pulled up, so I'm happy to take it. On average, what percentage of our teams summit each season? For those that don't, where do they tend to get turned around? I do have some of our stats in the last couple of years. So in 22, 10 of 12 expeditions summited. 2 teams aborted their summit attempt due to aid or rescue efforts. In 23, we had 8 out of 10 teams summit. 2 teams did not summit due to weather. In 2024, last year, we had 12 of 12 expeditions reach the summit, a 100% success. And then in this past year, 2025, we had 4 of 9 expedition summits in what was considered to be one of the most challenging weather seasons in 50 years. And the NPS also reported their lowest climber success in 2025. Don, those are like the stats, but can you talk a little bit more about like what would cause a team not to summit and some of the things you've seen in your experience guiding the peak?
In my experience up there, I've been able to have good summit weather windows on 7 of 8 trips. So that's kind of my stat. Weather is something that's obviously outside of our control. There are storms that come in Alaska that come in and just sit on that mountain for weeks sometimes. And this year, we had that. I talked to, several friends that were climbing independently up there that were able to pull it off, but they planned to be on the mountain for 18 days and stayed for 28 days to wait out a storm and make it happen. Obviously, on a commercial trip, we don't have the ability to stay that long. But Unfortunately, we can't really predict that, and there's not a whole lot we can do about it other than building time into the schedule. But weather can shut down a trip for sure. It's possible. We've seen it happen. Um, but on an individual basis, the vast majority of the time, the limiting factor in summiting, I find, is not weather. It's fitness and self-care. Um, we go at a slow enough pace that typically acclimatization and altitude is rarely an issue. We acclimatize really methodically and slowly. Um, it's often fitness that is the issue, or that someone isn't feeling well, so they stop eating and then they don't eat for like 2 or 3 days or something and then feel weak and then need to descend. Um, the great part about that is those things are all within our control. The fitness part of that, we can take care of ahead of time. Self-care is just something that people build through time and experience. And so to me, that's helpful to know that the things that are most likely to prevent us from summiting are things that we have some control over. The weather is the weather. It's going to do whatever it's going to do. But I find that it's more individual concerns much more often than it is the weather. And there's stats on this on the NPS website. You can find them. But what I've found, on average, there's typically about half of the 1,000 or so people a year that go to Alaska Summit Denali. And on private trips, that tends to be much lower. It's about 40%. On commercial trips, a little higher, up around 60%. I think for me, I think of the trips that I've led for Alpine Ascents, of the individuals, I think it's like 75 or 76%. So pretty high. Obviously, it's a mountain, there's no guarantees. But I think on a big mountain like this, anything more than 50% is a very, very good ratio.
I got distracted. I was reading the
You're
Q&A.
good.
Okay, question from Peter. If we manage to summit earlier in the trip, would there be a plane transport for us earlier than planned? Is the flight schedule flexible?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. We just book the flight out when we get to the airstrip on descent. So that isn't planned ahead of time. The mountain is and the weather there is so dynamic that, we can't possibly know 3 weeks out exactly when we're going to fly off. And I'm going to throw out some numbers, and I want to be super clear. Like, this isn't a guarantee that you might have a shorter trip, but I've done trips where I've flown off in 14 days, 15 days, 16 days. I've had a couple that have gone like 20 to 21 days. But I've been pretty fortunate with weather up there. I've definitely come off early. And typically what people do then is we just schedule that flight out in the morning. We fly out, stay in Talkeetna that night. Some people immediately will fly home the next day and get back to life and their families. Some people will take that extra time and travel around Alaska, or I know people that have gone to Hawaii with the extra time. Again, absolutely no guarantees of this. Plan on 21 days on the mountain, plan on a couple buffer days at the end, in case, something goes sideways or we get stuck at the airstrip. But it is possible, not guaranteed, to come out early. And if so, we can definitely accommodate that, no problem.
Wonderful. Okay, we have a question in the chat from Ashley. Can you share any experience guiding women with smaller frames and handling sled weight and working with participants from diverse backgrounds?
Yeah, that I think is a fantastic question. There's a big difference when you step off of that airplane and you have 120, 140 pounds of gear if you're 6 foot tall and you weigh 220 pounds versus the exact same amount of gear and if you're 5 feet tall and weigh 110 pounds. I'll say that several of our guides are smaller framed women. One of the guides that I did a trip with up there was 4'11". And she's a rock star and superhuman and did just fine. There's a couple things. One, people with smaller frames have smaller clothing and equipment, and their stuff tends to weigh a little bit less as a result, so they're not carrying as much weight as everybody else. Um, I think training ahead of time, and potentially even putting on a little bit of muscle, is advantageous for people. I've had a couple female clients over the last couple of years that are very much in that category, less than 120 pounds and, right around 5 feet tall. And for each of them, instead of trying to like lose weight for a trip the way that a lot of people do, their goal is actually to put on a few pounds of muscle to make pulling the sleds a little easier. And what I'm about to say, this is a style thing. It can't be a guarantee, but um, many of us guides find there's a very important difference between equity of weight and equality of weight on a trip. So, for example, if it benefits the team for a smaller person to carry a few less pounds, then maybe the guides could pull a couple pounds, or maybe we have a very strong person on the trip that doesn't mind taking a little bit extra group gear, as long as that somehow becomes equitable. I've seen people that say it changes their day to have a sled that weighs 10 less pounds. And so they can have a friend or somebody else maybe give them a little bit of help with that. And then when they get into camp, they set up the tent for that person, or they get their water, or, kind of like trade some help some way. Obviously, there's no guarantee that we can do that. We can always ask people if there's almost always somebody that wants to volunteer and help out. We can't guarantee it, but I would just recommend train as hard as possible beforehand, be as self-sufficient as humanly possible. But just know that generally speaking, our outlook is whatever is best for the individual, benefits the team. If we can all stay together and climb together, we're a better, stronger team. So we do the best we can to try and accommodate that, and we fully recognize that somebody that's a foot shorter and weighs 100 pounds less is going to have a more challenging time. And we also adjust, like when we're kicking in steps, the guides will always kick in smaller steps that maybe shorter than I would need at my height, but I know will benefit the shorter person behind. And we move at, especially to start, what will feel like a incredibly slow pace, like an almost boring pace to start off with, because we find that what happens early in the trip can have consequences days or weeks later. So we don't want to burn anybody out. We're not trying to run up the mountain with sleds, so we move at a very reasonable pace. We're not trying to max anybody out early in the trip.
Wonderful. Great answer. Okay, we have one more question in the Q&A. When climbers need to turn back early, how do you manage that on Denali, and how does that affect the rest of the climb?
Oh, that one is a big, it depends.
Yeah.
That depends on a lot of things. It depends on if you're the first trip of the season, the last trip of the season, if you're somewhere in between. It depends on weather. Um, what I can say for sure is one of the big advantages that Alpine Ascents has on that mountain, is Mary rattled off some numbers earlier, like, oh, this year we had 8 trips, this year we had 12 trips or 10. Um, Having those extra teams on the mountain is really beneficial if somebody needs to go down for whatever reason. It could be, sickness, fitness, family emergency, whatever. If Mary and I are both leading different trips up there, and somebody on my team needs to descend after Mary has finished her trip and she's coming down past us, we can just have that client hop onto Mary's team and go down the mountain, and they get off the mountain immediately, and it doesn't affect the timing of the trip that I'm leading in any way. Um, that's a best case scenario. It doesn't always work out to be exactly that way, but it's not uncommon to have at least a person at some point in the trip that needs to turn around. We do the absolute best we can to keep everybody together. But when that happens, I've not personally had it delay a trip ever. Um, Hypothetically, it could, but going with a company like ours that has more guides and more trips up there gives us a lot more options to be able to deal with it.
Wonderful. And that concludes all the Q&A questions in the box. Don, thank you so much. It's just such an informative webinar. As I mentioned at the top of the presentation, this has been recorded, and we'll post it on the blog and the Alpine Ascents YouTube channel in a couple of days. So look for that if you didn't take notes. And Don, one final question from me to you. What is your favorite part about guiding Denali?
Oh, I mean, the flight end's hard to beat. In terms of the climbing, I think being on the top of Denali with the team once they've all gotten up there. That to me is one of the most rewarding moments that I ever have in guiding, and not any summit, but specifically Denali, because it is a tough mountain. It's a very blue collar mountain, and when you stand up there with the team of people that you've climbed with, it's just so incredibly satisfying because you know that you made it happen yourself. You dealt with the weather, you got through, whatever you needed to down low on the mountain. Everybody came together as a team. And the reason that you're standing there is because we've been able to lean on everybody as a team and as a unit get up there. As opposed to like some Himalayan mountains. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I love having Sherpa help. I love using yaks and mules and things that make life easy. But it's incredibly rewarding to stand on top of Denali and know that you've done it together as a team. For me, I think that's probably the best moment that I have in a year guiding on any mountain anywhere in the world.
Wonderful. Well, there you have it. If you did not get your question answered, well, we answered them all, I think. Do feel free to call us at the office, or if you have a gear question, email our gear experts at gear@alpineascents.com, or shoot us a line. We'd be happy to help. And hopefully we'll see some of you in Washington, on Denali, or other places in the world. Don, thank you again.
Thank you
And
very much.
we'll see you in the mountains.
Thanks for the questions, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.